Hello. We will talk about the news article called "Households in Other Countries Are Paying Down Debt, but That's Not the Case in Canada," written by Evans, 2023. This article basically reports that household debt has been a rising issue in Canada, and Canada's household debt is the highest among the G7 countries. Now, G7 countries is the group of 7 industrialized nations conformed by the US, Canada, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and France. These countries reunite every year to discuss and make agreements and also to exchange ideas and coordinate policies on international issues. Now, we are going to compare how the household debt in Canada is higher to these G7 countries. If household prices rise, the economy will be affected too. Okay, so according to the debt service indicators of household, we can analyze here how the income or household GDP as a share has increased from the last quarter of 2021 to the last quarter of 2022. We can say that this is a positive situation for Canadians since we say, okay, the income is increasing throughout the years. There shouldn't be a situation or an incident to talk about. However, according to the debt service indicators of household, the National Canada household total in the last quarter of 2021 was around $209,000, and it increased in the previous quarter of 2022 to $242,000. So if we analyze these amounts, the increase is really high. So, and we are talking about Canada itself. Now we are going to analyze in this figure number 3 how debt loads for the countries of G7 on the right have altered. Like if we can see the blue one, the blue chart demonstrates for 2010, like the debt is high, but it has decreased in 2021. However, if we see Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and France, we can see how the orange chart, that in this case is 2021, the debt of this year has increased way high. We are going to focus in this case in Canada, since it's our matter of interest, okay? So let's compare Canada with the US, for example. The US in 2010, it shows a debt around not higher than the 80% or 100%, for example. But in 2021, then it decreased almost to the 50%. Okay, if we talk about or we consider amounts or numbers for this chart, specific numbers. But in this visualization, we can say that Canada, instead, it has a really high increase in the household debts. Now, since we have said that this is going to affect to the level of debt in the economy itself, it's really important matter to address, okay? So if we ask Canadians, and according to some surveys, they perform a survey for household every year, Canadians has said that this is a really national issue to address, since they feel like this is affecting their own individual lifestyle in the country. Okay, so household debt is, of course, a private debt. However, it has effects and consequences in the global economy of the country.
Hello, my name is Carmela Ramirez and I will be reporting about interest rate. So, the household debt is at 17% of disposable income. This means that an average Canadian citizen owes about $1.70 compared to their $1 income. This is a very alarming number. So, the overall mortgage debt in 2023 is 2.08 trillion. And this is very concerning. And the Bank of Canada can mitigate this problem by creating a macroprudential policy or increasing the interest rate. And this is what they currently did by increasing the interest rate to 4.4%. The Bank of Canada's interest rate has changed all over the years, and here is the trend. So as we can see, there are three major events that happened over from 2008 to 2023. So as we can see, Canada's interest rate went down around 2009, and that is because of the 2008 recession. And it maintained a low interest rate, and it slightly started um, recovering from the recession at around 2017. And around 2019, it started going down. And this is because of the 2020 pandemic or the COVID-19 pandemic that really changed uh, the way we live and around all over the world. And it basically shut down a lot of businesses. And and it started going up again at around 2021, and then it started to have a huge spike at around 2022, and this is because of the war between Ukraine and Russia that affected energy and other supplies all over the world. So how did Canada's mortgage rate accumulated all over accumulated now? We can see that for 13 years from 2009 to 2021, the interest rate is low, and it's lower than 2%. This entices a lot of people to buy houses and acquire a mortgage so they could pay less compared to a higher interest rate.
Hello everyone, I am Uma and today I am going to talk about the inflation rate of Canada and the relationship between the inflation rate and household debts in Canada. So in this graph, you can already show that the inflation rate is pretty high right now. It's about 4.4%. That is higher than the prior. And now we can move to the relationship between inflation and household debts. So first of all, the inflation rate influences the consumer spending. Whenever the inflation rate is high, the consumer tends to spend less, and the high inflation rate actually reduce the spending of consumer. That eventually helps to reduce the aggregate demand, and after that the lesser spending eventually helps to reduce the inflation rate. And the scenario can be opposite, like when people tend to borrow more money, they tend to spend more. The aggregate demand eventually get higher than the potential supply. That creates the scarcity in the market, and it could be lead to the inflation again. And after that, the inflation rate can create unstable financial statement, because whenever the aggregate demand is more than the aggregate supply, then the scarcity can create the bankrupt situation as well. So that can lead to the inflation rates higher. And there is no like direct relationship between the interest rate and the inflation, but whenever the inflation is higher, sometimes the government, the Bank of Canada, try to high the interest rate to reduce the borrowing power of the people. So whenever the borrowing power of the people reduced, they tend to spend lesser money in their consuming, and that can eventually lead to the lesser inflation. And the inflation rate can also change the behavioral pattern of the consumer, because whenever the consumer think of like the inflation is going to be happen in the future, they tend to buy more right now because they try to spend more on the products right now, because the inflation is going to make the products expensive. So whenever the consumers try to buy more right now with greater sum of money, that can create the inflation rate higher. But actually there is a little direct relationship between the inflation rate and household rates. Yeah, the inflation rate is also the relationship also is depending other factors like the overall economic condition. It depends on the overall economic conditions of the country, and also it depends on the monetary policy. Because the government intervention is always there whenever the economy is in unstable position, and it also depends on the interplay of other variables in a country's economy. So thank you all.
My topic is aggregate demand and supply increase in price and influence GDP. When we go to the first slide, we can see that 2 government agencies have announced that the housing prices have been increased in Canada. There are various reasons for that, as population growth, urbanizations, and etc. So, in this concept, we should consider about the additional aggregate demand and aggregate supply concept.
My name is Giridhar. I'm part of the group D. Today I'm going to discuss about the multiplier effect. Now then, in the previous slides, we understood how interest rate reflects and affects the economic situation, which in turn impacts the consumer purchasing power, investments, and banking. We will now see the multiplier effect and its impact on the GDP. The multiplier effect, household debts and interest rates are interconnected and influence the GDP in a larger extent. Government implements policies to control inflation, while banks raise interest rates to combat a high inflation. The impact of rate increase can substantially affect long-term and periodic payments. Now we will understand the multiplier effect. The multiplier effect is driven by the relationship between change in autonomous expenditure and equilibrium income. It represents the degree to which a change in autonomous spending impacts equilibrium production. Now we can understand this from seeing the graph wherein the autonomous expenditure A0, when it increases to A1, there is a shift in equilibrium from YE to YU1, and which impacts the output income and the aggregate expenditure, which in turn impacts the GDP. Here there are both positive and negative consequences are possible. Factors that influence multiple multiplier effects are the interest rates, which affects the cost of borrowing, and the house debt, which impacts borrowing and spending. Together, they influence the multiplier effect, and which in turn impacts the GDP. Now, the next slide, we'll talk about impact on GDP in the positive and the negative way when because of the change in autonomous expenditure and the multiplier effect. Increased borrowing and spending by households can boost the economy. It leads to rise in consumer demands for production and service. This increased demand contributes to GDP growth and potential job creation. When on the negative side, we can see when the interest rate increases, borrowing becomes more expensive. This can discourage households from taking an additional debt or prompt them to pay off their existing debts. Reducing borrowing and spending by households can lead to decline in the economy, lowering the demand for goods and services. This decline in demand can impact GDP, employment, and production. This we can understand from this graph, wherein it shows the spending and the GDP increase or decrease with the rate of multiplier. And for 1,000 spending, we can see the GDP is 5,000, wherein the multiplier effect increases on the amount of spending increases, and in vice versa, when the amount of spending decreases, the multiplier effect decreases the GDP. Thank you.